The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp hummed a monotonous tune, a perpetual dirge for the soul. It was the kind of sterile, soul-crushing symphony that made you question every life choice that led you to this cubicle farm. My life was a predictable rhythm of debugging code, optimizing server loads, and occasionally, helping Brenda from accounting figure out why her printer was spitting out pages that looked like a Jackson Pollock painting after a particularly violent migraine. I was John, IT analyst, the guy who kept the digital gears of this corporate behemoth grinding, the invisible infrastructure behind the polished veneer of synergy and strategic alignment. My name was never on the org chart, never mentioned in the annual reports, but I was the guy who knew every wire, every server, every forgotten password. I was the digital butler, polishing the silverware of their digital lives while they debated the finer points of disruption over artisanal coffee. This morning, however, the usual hum felt like a warning siren. It started with an email, a terse calendar invite at 9:03 a.m. for a quick sync with Mark Sterling, Senior Director of Synergistic Growth Initiatives. The subject line was innocuous enough, but the sender's name, Mark Sterling, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the aggressively Arctic office temperature. Mark, the guy who, for the past 6 months, had treated my inbox like a personal harassment hotline. It began subtly, a DM on the internal messaging system, ostensibly about a project, but laced with a flirty undertone that made my stomach clench. Then came the late-night messages, the just checking in text that started appearing when I was trying to wind down after a 12-hour day, wrestling with a server that decided to develop an existential crisis. His messages were a carefully curated blend of professional jargon and thinly veiled suggestive remarks. "You're such a lifesaver, John. Really know how to handle a crisis, don't you?" Or, my personal favorite, "This system is so complex, I could really use someone with your unique skills to guide me through it." Unique skills. My unique skills involved knowing how to reset a forgotten password and reroute a network cable without causing a company-wide blackout. Not exactly the kind of skills he seemed to be hinting at. My initial reaction was confusion, then discomfort, then a gnawing anxiety. I'd seen enough office dramas unfold, enough whispered gossip around the water cooler, to know that this was a slippery slope. I'm not the confrontational type. I'm the guy who prefers to fix things quietly, efficiently, without making a fuss. My life was like a well-maintained database, organized, functional, and ideally, invisible. But Mark Sterling seemed determined to make me visible in all the wrong ways. I'd tried to deflect, polite, professional responses. "Glad I could help, Mark. Just doing my job. Let me know if anything else comes up with the system." I'd even started keeping my office door ajar, as if the mere suggestion of an audience would deter him. It didn't. If anything, it seemed to embolden him. He'd lean in, his cologne, a cloying mix of sandalwood and desperation, wafting into my personal space, his eyes lingering a beat too long on my face. It felt like being trapped in a corporate jungle gym with a particularly persistent and poorly trained monkey. The escalation was insidious. He started calling me Johnny in front of colleagues, a patronizing endearment that made my teeth ache. He'd accidentally brush against my arm in the hallway, a phantom touch that left me feeling dirty, and the DMs kept coming, bolder now, more direct. "You're the only one who really understands me here, John. This office is so sterile, you're the only thing that brings any heat. Heat!" I was already sweating buckets trying to keep their servers from melting down. This isn't a story about HR being useless, though we'll get to that. This is a story about recognizing that sometimes the system itself can be weaponized. You see, I'm not just an IT guy. I'm a digital archivist by nature. I hoard information. Every ticket I've ever closed, every system update I've ever pushed, every frantic Slack message from an executive who's lost their password to the coffee machine, it's all meticulously logged. It's not paranoia, it's professional diligence. In the tech world, documentation is king. It's the only way to prove who did what, when, and why. And in a place like Sterling Corp, where synergy meant backstabbing and growth meant someone else getting fired, documentation was my shield. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confrontation, it was a Tuesday. I was hunched over my keyboard, trying to untangle a knot of legacy code that was threatening to unravel our entire CRM system, when a DM from Mark popped up. "Hey Johnny, got a minute? Need to discuss a personal project." The winking emoji. That damn winking emoji. It landed in my inbox like a stray bullet. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about IT anymore. This was something else entirely. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a sudden, icy surge of anger. I'd spent years being the quiet, reliable backbone of this company, the guy who fixed things behind the scenes. I'd patched their systems, secured their data, and patiently explained the concept of a firewall to people who thought it was a type of fire extinguisher. And now, I was being subjected to this sleazy, pathetic attempt at intimidation. I closed the messaging app, took a deep breath. My office wasn't exactly a fortress of solitude. It was a beige box with a flimsy partition, where the ambient noise of keyboards and hushed conversations was the soundtrack to my professional life. But right then, I needed to be alone. I needed to think. And that's when I remembered the logs. All of them. Every message, every email, every interaction I'd ever had with Mark Sterling. I'd been dutifully saving them, not out of malice, but out of a professional habit of preserving records. A digital breadcrumb trail. Most people delete their chat histories, thinking they're just clutter. I saw them as evidence. I opened the export function for our internal messaging system. It felt like opening Pandora's box, but instead of unleashing evils, I was preparing to unleash truth. The system churned, spitting out a series of text files, each one a stark testament to Mark's persistent, unwelcome advances. I scrolled through them, my stomach churning with a mixture of disgust and grim satisfaction. The personal project messages, the loaded compliments, the increasingly suggestive innuendos. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard text. Every single one of his transgressions was captured, time-stamped, and undeniably real. Most people, in this situation, would have gone to HR. They would have sat across from a polite but ultimately detached HR representative, poured out their story, and hoped for the best. And the best outcome? A stern talking to for the offender, a veiled threat of investigation, and a lingering sense of unease that they might have just made an enemy. The worst outcome? Nothing, or worse, retaliation. But I'm not most people. I'm the guy who understands how systems work, and I understood that HR, while having its purpose, was often reactive, not proactive. They dealt with problems after they blew up. I wanted to prevent a blow-up. I wanted to make sure this didn't just disappear into a bureaucratic black hole. I opened my calendar, a familiar interface, usually filled with meeting requests for server maintenance, patch deployments, and the occasional mandatory cybersecurity training. Today, it was going to be a different kind of appointment, a recurring one. I created a new event. Subject, urgent follow-up, harassment concerns, Mark Sterling. I set the date for today, naturally. Then I adjusted the recurrence, daily. For the next, forever, or at least until my employment ended. I didn't want a one-time HR meeting. I wanted a constant, irrefutable reminder, a digital nagging, if you will. A persistent hum in the background of their corporate efficiency, a constant echo of Mark's inappropriate behavior. I attached the exported chat logs to the calendar invite, all of them, the entire sordid history. I set the notification to go off 15 minutes before the scheduled time. 15 minutes for someone, hopefully someone important, to see it, to realize the gravity of it, and to, for the love of all that is digital, do something about it. I didn't send it to Mark. That would have been too obvious, too direct. That would have been playing his game. No, this was about playing my game. My game involves understanding the pathways, the access points, the people who wield the real power, however indirectly. I knew who Mark reported to. I knew who was in charge of his department. And I knew that HR, despite their perceived limitations, were the gatekeepers of such information. So I meticulously crafted a distribution list. It included Mark's direct manager, the head of HR, the VP of his division, and a few key individuals in legal. People who, by their very job descriptions, couldn't afford to ignore something like this. I clicked save. The digital equivalent of dropping a bomb. I leaned back in my chair, the sterile hum of the office suddenly feeling less like a dirge and more like the quiet before a storm. Mark Sterling had made a mistake, a big one. He'd treated me like an insignificant cog in the machine, like someone he could dismiss, harass, and ultimately discard. He'd mistaken my quiet competence for weakness. He'd underestimated the power of documentation. He'd forgotten that even the most invisible gears can grind the entire engine to a halt. The notification hadn't fired yet. The storm hadn't broken. But I could feel the pressure building. The data was out there. The system had been primed. And Mark Sterling, in his smug, ill-informed arrogance, had just set himself up for a recurring appointment with consequences. He wouldn't understand it at first. He'd see the calendar invite, dismiss it as a glitch, or another IT issue to be dealt with. But it wouldn't go away. It would pop up again, and again, and again. A digital ghost, haunting his every move, reminding him of the lines he'd so carelessly crossed. Part 1 was complete. The setup was in motion. Now, it was time to watch the dominoes fall. And the real fun? The real justice was about to begin. The digital hum of Sterling Corp was a subtle tremor now, a low-frequency vibration that barely registered on most people's conscious minds. But for me, John, the IT analyst who lived and breathed the company's digital skeleton, it was an unsettling precursor to the storm I'd orchestrated. The calendar invite, meticulously crafted and sent to a select group of decision-makers, had done its job. It sat in their inboxes, a daily, unignorable alarm clock set to the tune of Mark Sterling's inappropriate advances. My own life, meanwhile, had returned to its familiar, quiet rhythm. I answered tickets, patched systems, and even helped Brenda from accounting with her persistent printer woes. I was the phantom in the machine, the invisible hand that kept Sterling Corp from imploding. But beneath the placid surface, my mind was a battlefield, strategizing, calculating, and meticulously organizing the arsenal I had gathered. The personal project that Mark had so eagerly pushed for had, in my hands, become a sprawling digital archive. Months of his DMs, emails, and increasingly bold internal messages were no longer just a source of dread and disgust. They were my ammunition. I had exported every single piece of communication, meticulously timestamped and cataloged. Each just checking in text, each suggestive emoji, each veiled threat was a bullet point in my growing dossier. I'd even gone back further, cross-referencing project emails where his inappropriate remarks had bled into professional correspondence, creating a damning narrative of his escalating behavior. This wasn't just a collection of messages, it was a comprehensive behavioral profile, a digital autopsy of his unprofessionalism. I also meticulously documented my own professionalism. Every completed task, every successful server migration, every security patch deployed was logged with an obsessive detail that, in hindsight, felt like I was building a monument to my own diligence. I printed out performance reviews, commendations from senior IT staff, and even a few unsolicited thank you notes from department heads I'd helped navigate IT crises. This wasn't about proving I was a good employee. It was about establishing a stark contrast to the man who was systematically trying to undermine me. This was the foundation of my case, the bedrock upon which Sterling Corp would have to reckon with its own rot. The first domino fell subtly. It was a Friday afternoon, just as the week was winding down. A critical client, a major player in the pharmaceutical industry, sent an urgent email to the VP of Sales. Their system, which relied on a secure, real-time data feed from our analytics platform, had inexplicably gone offline. No warning, no error message, just a complete blackout. Panic, a rare commodity in our usually placid sales department, began to ripple outwards. Calls were made, frantic emails were exchanged, and soon, the IT department was inundated with frantic requests for an explanation. I, of course, was nowhere to be found on the IT department's frantic communication channels. My work email had been carefully set to auto-reply, a polite out-of-office message that simply stated I was on a pre-planned, intermittent connectivity leave until further notice. My direct line was disconnected. My personal phone, once a lifeline for urgent calls, was switched off, nestled safely in a drawer at home. I had meticulously planned my own absence, ensuring that my departure would be felt, not as a wound, but as a missing limb. The panic escalated over the weekend. Mass emails went out from the VP of Operations, demanding immediate updates and threatening dire consequences for the lack of service. Internal Slack channels, usually filled with banter and project updates, became a torrent of anxious questions and thinly veiled accusations directed at the IT department. Colleagues who had once seen me as the quiet, indispensable background presence now whispered my name with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "Where's John?" became the refrain. He always knew how to fix this stuff. Then came the secondhand information, the whispers that reached me through trusted channels. Brenda from accounting, bless her perpetually flustered heart, sent me a cryptic text. "John, is everything okay? Mark's really upset. The whole pharma thing is a disaster. HR keeps asking about you. You haven't answered your work phone." Another colleague, a developer I'd once pulled an all-nighter with to save a critical project, messaged, "Dude, where are you? They're saying the whole analytics server is down and no one has access. This is huge. Is it a virus? Did you get infected?" The true architects of Sterling Corp's toxic culture, the ones who had enabled Mark's behavior and turned a blind eye to his harassment, were starting to feel the heat. Their meticulously constructed edifice of corporate jargon and deniability was beginning to crack. The calendar reminders, initially dismissed as an IT glitch or a bizarre HR anomaly, were now becoming impossible to ignore. Every 15 minutes, a chime would sound, followed by the stark text, "Urgent follow-up, harassment concerns, Mark Sterling. Please see attached documentation for critical action." Each chime was a tiny hammer blow against their carefully constructed ignorance. The whispers reached Mark Sterling himself. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance who still had some semblance of integrity, that he was furious. He was demanding to know where I was, demanding access to my systems, demanding that this IT issue be resolved immediately. He was used to wielding power through intimidation and suggestive remarks, not through a well-placed calendar invite. He was adrift in a sea of his own making, with no IT lifeline to throw him. The trap was now fully sprung. I hadn't retaliated with anger. I had weaponized bureaucracy, I had turned their own systems against them, and now I was ready to deliver the final, precise blow. I opened my personal email, the one with the misspelled middle name, the one I'd used to contact the legal department for my estate planning consultation. I had a meticulously prepared document, a formal complaint that laid out, with irrefutable evidence, the entirety of Mark Sterling's harassment and misconduct. It detailed every DM, every suggestive comment, every inappropriate advance, all corroborated by the chat logs I'd exported and the timestamps on our internal messaging system. But it wasn't just about Mark. This complaint was designed to expose the systemic failure that allowed his behavior to fester. I carefully detailed how his advances had been ignored, dismissed, or downplayed by those in positions of power. I referenced my own attempts to address the situation through official channels and the deafening silence that followed. Crucially, I CC'd the relevant regulatory body, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. This wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. My complaint was now officially on record, a ticking time bomb with legal ramifications. I didn't send it directly to Mark or to his direct manager. That would be too predictable. Instead, I sent it to the head of HR, the VP of his division, and the general counsel, people who, by their job descriptions, could not afford to ignore it, especially with the EEOC involved. I added a single polite line at the end, further documentation available upon request. The implication was clear. The entire chain of command had been complicit, and now, an external body was watching. The following Monday, the tremors turned into an earthquake. The client whose system had gone down demanded a full explanation and threatened to terminate their multi-million-dollar contract. News of the EEOC complaint, though officially confidential, began to leak through the corporate grapevine, creating a palpable sense of unease. Whispers about a serious HR issue and potential legal action replaced the usual buzz of business as usual. Mark Sterling, once the smooth-talking manager with an insatiable appetite for attention, was now a pariah. Colleagues avoided eye contact. His own manager, who had previously shielded him, was now visibly distancing himself, his face a mask of panic damage control. The calendar invites, still pinging with relentless regularity, served as a constant, humiliating reminder of his transgressions, appearing on the screens of those who had enabled him, forcing them to confront the problem they had so carefully ignored. The company was in freefall. The infrastructure, now limping without my constant oversight, was beginning to buckle under the strain. Critical systems were failing, client confidence was eroding, and the very foundations of Sterling Corp were shaking. They had ignored the whispers, dismissed the warnings, and tried to bury the truth. But the truth, like well-documented code, always finds a way to resurface. They knew they were in trouble. They knew I was the architect of this chaos. But they still didn't grasp the full extent of the leverage I held. They still didn't understand that the game had just begun. The silence from Sterling Corp was deafening. For days, the only communication I received was automated system alerts about critical failures and the persistent, maddening chime of my recurring calendar notifications. Then it came. Not an email, not a Slack message, but a phone call, a blocked number. I let it ring twice, a small, grim satisfaction warming me. On the third ring, I picked up. "John, is that you?" The voice was strained, brittle, stripped of its usual authoritative swagger. It was David Thompson, the senior VP of operations, the man who signed my performance reviews and nodded sagely during executive briefings, always looking like he understood far more than he actually did. He sounded like a man drowning, grasping for a life raft. "This is John," I replied, my voice deliberately calm, even. I was sitting in my living room, a cup of perfectly brewed Earl Grey steaming beside me. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness I had left behind. "John, we need to talk. This situation is escalating. The client is threatening to sue, the board is demanding answers, and HR is in a complete meltdown. We need you to come back." Thompson's voice was laced with desperation. "Just temporarily, to get things back online. We can make it worth your while." "Make it worth your while?" I echoed, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. When I tried to address this internally, through the proper channels, I was met with silence. When I reported the harassment, nothing happened. Now when the company is on the brink of collapse, you suddenly need my IT skills? He faltered. "Look, John, I wasn't aware of the full extent of what was happening. I've seen the complaint. It's not good, but we can rectify this. We need to, for the company." "Rectify it?" I took a slow sip of my tea. "You mean for yourselves, for your reputations, for your shareholders. You want me to clean up the mess you all helped create." "We understand your frustration," Thompson continued, the words clearly rehearsed, "and we're willing to make significant concessions. Reinstatement, of course, a substantial bonus. And we're prepared to address the issues with Mark Sterling. Severance, immediate termination, whatever it takes. I leaned back in my chair, the comfortable, worn fabric a balm against the harsh corporate world I had escaped. Mr. Thompson, my IT skills are not the only thing I possess. I also have documentation, detailed, time-stamped, irrefutable documentation of months of harassment. I have records of my own exemplary performance. And thanks to a rather interesting clause I negotiated into my original employment contract back in 2019, the one everyone overlooked during the Synergy restructuring, I have a claim to a significant portion of the intellectual property that Sterling Corp is currently operating on. A choked gasp came through the receiver. IP? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the core analytics platform, Mr. Thompson, the algorithms that drive your synergistic growth initiatives, the proprietary code that makes Sterling Corp what it island. I was the principal architect, and according to Section 4B of my employment agreement, upon termination without cause, that IP reverts to me. And let's be honest, being subjected to ongoing harassment and then being effectively ignored by HR when I reported it qualifies as without cause, wouldn't you agree? Especially with an EEOC complaint now on record. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could almost hear the frantic whispers on the other end, the panicked consultations with legal teams. They had underestimated me. They had seen me as a replaceable cog, a background hum. They had forgotten that even the most silent gears can grind the entire machine to a halt. John, this is unprecedented, Thompson stammered. We can't just have you own the core of our business. Oh, but you can, I replied, my voice still calm, measured. Or, you have two other options. Option A, I pause for dramatic effect, is that you reinstate me immediately. With a significant promotion to Chief Technology Officer, a commensurate salary increase, and a formal apology from the board for my treatment. Additionally, Mark Sterling will be terminated with cause, and a public statement acknowledging his misconduct will be issued. We can then work on stabilizing the company. Option B, I continued, the words hanging in the air like a final verdict, is that I exercise my IP rights. I will immediately transfer all proprietary code, all design schematics, all documentation related to the Sterling Corp analytics platform into my sole ownership. Your systems will go dark. Your client contracts will evaporate. Your market value will plummet. And then I will be filing a lawsuit for wrongful termination and constructive dismissal, with the EEOC complaint as a significant factor. I could hear the shuffling of papers, the hushed, urgent voices. Thompson was clearly not making this decision alone. The real players, the ones who truly wielded power at Sterling Corp, were now being forced to confront the consequences of their indifference. We need time to consult, Thompson said, his voice barely audible. You have 24 hours. I replied, after that, the offer of Option A expires, and Option B becomes the only reality. I hung up, leaving them to grapple with the digital ghost they had tried to exorcise. The next day was a blur of anxious waiting. I did not check my work email. I did not engage with any internal messaging systems. I simply lived my life, secure in the knowledge that the gears of Sterling Corp were grinding to a halt, and they knew who held the wrench. The call came late that afternoon. It was the general counsel, a notoriously sharp lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. Her voice was clipped, professional, but beneath it, I could sense a grudging respect. Mr. Lane, she began, the board has reviewed your proposal. Option A presents significant challenges, but it is the preferred course of action to avoid irreparable damage to the company. The deal was struck. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and internal restructuring. Mark Sterling was indeed terminated, his departure swift and silent, a stain on the company's reputation that they desperately tried to scrub away. A public apology, albeit a carefully worded one, was issued internally, acknowledging the company's failure to address issues of workplace conduct. I was reinstated, not as a mere IT analyst, but as Chief Technology Officer, with a substantial salary increase and a mandate to rebuild the company's fractured infrastructure and, more importantly, its broken culture. The true architects of the toxicity, the ones who had enabled Mark and ignored my plight, found themselves in precarious positions. Some were demoted, others were forced into early retirement, their reputations tarnished by their complicity. The company, stripped of its corrupting elements, began the long, arduous process of rebuilding. As for me, John, the quiet IT analyst, I stood on the precipice of a new chapter. The scars of the past remained, but they were now badges of honor, testaments to a battle fought not with shouting matches, but with meticulous planning and an unwavering belief in the power of the truth. I had weaponized inconvenience, turned data into justice, and proven that even the most invisible gears can bring down the most imposing machines. Watching the news reports about Sterling Corp's strategic realignment and their sudden surge in transparency initiatives was satisfying. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what I had. If watching hubris crumble under the weight of its own indifference, if witnessing corporate rot be exposed by the very systems designed to prevent it, if seeing the quiet analyst emerge victorious from the shadows sparks something in you, consider liking and subscribing. Stories like this don't just happen. They are meticulously crafted, bite by bite, until the final execution. And sometimes, the most satisfying victories are the ones fought in silence, with a well-placed calendar invite and a meticulously documented truth. The hum of Sterling Corp was different now. It was a hum of recovery, of rebuilding, a testament to the fact that even the most toxic environments can be cleansed, if you're willing to expose the rot and hold those responsible accountable. My reign as CTO was just beginning, and the systems I built would ensure that transparency and integrity were not just buzzwords, but the bedrock of everything Sterling Corp stood for. Justice, after all, is best served cold, meticulously documented, and with impeccable IT support.